office came to Puerto Rico constantly to be part of this development of this declarative statement. This declarative statement was trying to solve the situation of the denials for ownership, the ownership issue, you know, the land tenure or property title issue with the FEMA benefits. And we thought we had a good document. It was approved by FEMA, so we had a communication from that lawyer from that office that it was approved. And we thought we had this win. We really thought we had an advocacy win on that sense. And it was a good document. It provided different legal particularities of land tenure and property with the civil code in Puerto Rico. It was in English and Spanish, so that was very good because most of the appeals were written in Spanish, and then we were sent out to FEMA. Whoever was reading that would not understand and interpret something else and would deny the FEMA application. So this document was in English and Spanish.
Because Google Translate's not really a good translator.
So that was good. The obstacle with this was that 9 to 10 months after, FEMA did not want to notify all the people that were denied because of ownership. They did not notify no one. They didn't have it available on the DRCs and the centers throughout the island. They did not have it printed out on the centers. So it became inaccessible in that sense. So we, 20 plus organizations again had to go back to the communities with this document to help people fill it out because it really represented an alternative to have assistance, FEMA assistance. So that was like a real that was a real issue. Other obstacles that we are facing, and again with FEMA and now also with some recovery funds and on long term, is that all this discussion I've been hearing is more about property or insurance issues, and it seems to me and some of the people that I work with that it's not about property issues, it's not about insurance issues with FEMA, it's about recognizing housing as a human right. And that is really important for us. It's constantly, when we talk to each other or when we talk to FEMA or when we go to Congress to advocate for Puerto Rico, to constantly say that for us, this is, it's not an issue, it's the home. It's housing as a human right. And for that, for us, it's we have to say it over and over again, not only saying it, but writing it down, so policies can be changed towards that. We have long discussions with FEMA that, they just see it like it was an insurance or whatever, and it's not like that. Other obstacles that we're facing is that in Puerto Rico we have an oversight board that is imposing, it has been imposing for the past 2 years austerity measures and closing 400 schools, and it's recently informed after the hurricane that they want to eliminate from the University of Puerto Rico budget $385 million from the university budget, which would be terrible for access to justice projects, because we have a lot of clinics that we fund. We have different projects that students, law school students, help us with. And it would be terrible for not only us and our projects and the university, but for the people. Taking $385 million out of the budget of the University of Puerto Rico, it's like declaring its potential death to public education, public higher education. I mentioned in one of the slides, another obstacle that for us has been constant is that Puerto Rico has a 46% poverty rate. It's really, really high. It's higher than any of the states in the United States, and it raised after Hurricane Maria to 51%. So, we are dealing with, a really dire, precarious situation in our communities. People drinking from the river, the kids that I visit in communities literally with, food and clothing. And sometimes we see some, announcements or on TV from other countries, and I see it. I go to communities in Puerto Rico, so the poverty there, it's different from the States. And if poverty rate keeps going like that, it means that people cannot afford paying a lawyer, or cannot afford going to courts to have representation. So, you know, with more inequality and more poverty, you know, for us, I wish we could have so many funds to have a broader access to justice projects throughout the island, but you know, we have what we have. But if we have more poverty because of austerity measures and all the context that's going on in Puerto Rico, definitely puts us in a position that we cannot help as much people as we could. So that definitely is an obstacle. And last, I wanted to mention that many folks with good intentions want to advocate on Congress for Puerto Rico. You know, we really appreciate all the help that we can get. But when you go to Congress and meet with either congresswomen or men or staffers and talk about Puerto Rico, you know, it's really, really important to take into consideration the community needs. What we were talking about, what she mentioned, and other folks here mentioned, and Kim mentioned, you know, the suffering of the people, the true needs of the people of Puerto Rico. That's really important when advocating. And it's really frustrating because 2 weeks ago, there was a public hearing at Congress where folks from HUD were saying that $8.2 billion from the CDBDR grant coming to Puerto Rico have been stopped. They're not sending that money, it's mitigation money, because, and I quote, Puerto Rico is so unstable politically, we're not going to send that federal money. My answer to that is that yes, because federal government and government in all the states are not corrupt. Only Puerto Rico, just being sarcastic. So, you know, it's very frustrating for us that we really, really have the right to that money. It's mitigation money, so we really depend on mitigation to be able to, you know, people can have their homes, and either if they're in a flood or in a mudslide, we need to solve that urgently, and it's been 2 years. So, you know, federal money not coming to Puerto Rico to help in that sense, to help the communities that we legally aid, is also a huge obstacles in many senses of the, you know, of what's going on. So yeah, so some tiny obstacles.
So I'll talk about two obstacles two among many. One is legal obstacles, and the other is process obstacles. And I'll give you an example that we encountered as a legal obstacle. In order to be, I mentioned before the 240 non-PRASA, very rural, geographically isolated communities, their drinking water systems, they were not eligible for FEMA funding. And the only way to get them eligible for FEMA funding was to incorporate them as 501c3 private nonprofit corporations. And so that required articles of incorporation, it required bylaws, and it also required paying a $300 fee to the Puerto Rico Department of Commerce. These are significant barriers for communities that are already experiencing the worst of what any community can experience. And so we have a lawyer in our Caribbean Environmental Protection Division, Hector Velez, who actually worked with 163 of those 240 communities to prepare articles of incorporation and bylaws and prevail upon the governor's office and the Department of Commerce to get waiver grants of the fees. And he actually had a law intern from one of the local law schools who helped him to do that. The other barrier that I want to talk about is process barriers. And so I'm a mediator and a facilitator, and I run the Collaboration and Conflict Resolution Program at EPA Region 2. And I'm often brought in when things aren't working smoothly. And what we typically see in post-disaster context, and this is not unique to Maria and Irma, we saw it in Sandy, there are a number of reasons why things don't go as smoothly as they could. One is that there are many different organizations, NGOs, academia, different levels of government, foundations, that want to be at the table and need to be at the table. And sometimes it's very hard to harmonize their institutional interests. That's one problem. They're often in their own silos, and they're not used to collaborating on work that they do on a day-to-day basis. Secondly, related to the obstacle process, is there are key staff that have to be involved in many different projects that are going on at the same time. And they're pulled in many different directions, and it's very hard for them to focus their attention in any particular area, and it often leads to work group fatigue. Third, the urgency of the situation can stir passions, which could lead to, because everyone cares so much, it could lead to some personality conflicts, which you can have even when there isn't a dire situation. There's uncertainty about resources. There's uncertainty about the effectiveness of strategies. Last night Joel Sharaga talked about work group fatigue. Tool fatigue. There's so many tools available, it's very hard to know how to go forward. So all these things together make it very difficult. So the first thing I'll say in terms of addressing those process problems is, number one, I'll put in a plug for the ARC-X, the Adaptation Resource Center that Joel Sharaga mentioned, because that's a way of making things more accessible for communities. And I'm very pleased and we're honored that University at Albany is taking the lead for doing a state-level ARC-X for New York and helping with the Puerto Rico one as well. But the other thing I'll say is, when things aren't going as smoothly as they can, I suggest hiring or bringing in facilitators or mediators, bringing in impartial third parties who can help organize conversations. And I'll give you a good example of that, which happened after Hurricane Sandy. I mentioned the Line on Smart Growth Resiliency Partnership. We had state, federal, local, NGOs. We had a whole group of people. Later, the academics came in. They had been working for a year to try to pull some projects off the ground and were not successful. There were a number of things that contributed to this. Some including, as I mentioned, institutional differences. The two counties all around at that time had, one had a Democratic head, the other had a Republican. There were some political things going on. There were personality challenges in the group. It was hard to harmonize their institutional cultures. And so we brought in a facilitator from the Consensus Building Institute, who I worked on and off over a period of 2 years. And we facilitated the conversations, which led to the launch of a multi-stakeholder event, which I won't spend much time now. If we have more time, I'll talk about that. But that broke the logjam. Having this impartial third-party facilitator helped to break through all of those barriers that we often see on the process level when we're dealing with disasters and we're dealing with good people and good organizations trying to create something positive out of it.
We need to get back across, I know, for the next panel. So I'm going to have, because it does end like 5 minutes ago, right? It's okay. It's okay. So here's the deal. We've thought a lot about what could lead to more justice and sustainability in resilience efforts or legal efforts in our various areas. So now you have to find us later today and hear stuff from us about that, because we thought about it. So come find us later. In the meantime, please give these people a great round of applause for all of them. Thank you for braving the cold to come over here and spend some time with us. We do? I thought we had, never mind. See, I thought we only had till 3:30. It's 3:30. We have 10 more minutes. I'm good with that. So now, see, I put you on the spot. Justice and sustainability. Because that was your assignment. You were supposed to be thinking about what can bring more justice and sustainability. Justice and sustainability, some people aren't necessarily lawyers or doing policy work all the time, so that's why. It's both. Go ahead.
I think that in the case of Puerto Rico, especially after what we've been through with so many FEMA denials, many of them because of the ownership issue, which have led to land tenure and property title issues. you know, HUD funding and now our foundation as well are focused on providing legal aid to help people out with, you know, having their formal title. It's, like I said, our rule of law right now does not require people to be to have, you know, a deed, like a document, you know, for that. But since we saw the struggle when FEMA came and SBA and everyone was asking for so many documents, we started with this project for helping people out with their deeds, with their full formality on their deeds, on their documents. The difference is that in Puerto Rico, these processes can take a long time. Estate law in Puerto Rico takes a long time. We're talking about houses where someone lives there and because it was inherited by their grandparents and then they died as well and they were like going like 10 generations back. And because of our Spanish descent, civil code and regulations is very complex, very technical in terms of you know, the legal entanglement of it all, and it costs a lot of money. And not only that, but many of these situations require, you know, I don't know how to say it in English, agrimensura. I don't know if someone here knows it. Measuring the plot of land. Survey, thank you. Thank you. So, you know, it combines doing that, those technical services, which could cost from $3,000 to $30,000, which is not real at all for our communities, plus the, you know, the legal costs. So we can have all the legal brigades in the world to do this, but it's not sustainable. So in that sense, what we really our focus is all obviously in providing this legal service, but at the same time, we realized that we needed to change legislation, we needed to change the process in public agencies that deal with, you know, property title and land tenure in Puerto Rico, which are several, and we needed to change the policy. We needed to change. It would facilitate legal process for everyone, for lawyers, and for the people that need the property title. If we have change in legislation and in public policy and in the protocols and the way that public agencies are handling these issues, we can definitely have something sustainable. Because right now, our foundation, like other panelists said, we depend on donations. And, you know, we will constantly advocate for more funds, but we definitely need government and legislature in Puerto Rico to help us in that sense to be able to have sustainable processes, especially for ownership issues in Puerto Rico.
So what does justice look like? What is justice? I think what we've been trying to understand through the work of Unidos por Palo is people without means have access to the same resources and methods as people with resources, that they're treated the same, that there isn't a divided Puerto Rico where there's one that has access to power several months before one that does not. I think in terms of sustainability, it's devolving a lot of the responsibilities that are coming at the state level to local levels, where there's plans in place and the decision makers are at the local level, and reporting up, I think, is a way of trying to bridge that gap and to change how decisions are being made right now.
And for me, with this question, I was thinking more in general about what sustainability looks like, and my experience in Puerto Rico is limited at this point, but so in general, with the initiative that I run with my students, the way that I think about sustainability is very much drawn from human development theory, and thinking through psychology and what motivates people to act in the ways that they do, and a lot of that comes down to meeting basic human needs, and we've talked about a lot of that in this conference, and I think it applies both in the sustainability context but also resilience. if folks have access to their basic needs before a disaster, and they have a lot of options for accessing those basic needs, then chances are they're probably going to have more options during a disaster to be able to fulfill those needs as well. And so when you think about human well-being and the individual person being resilient, I think it comes down to options and allowing folks to have capabilities to choose between different options for the things that they really need in their lives. We hear a lot about energy, for example. Man, we rely on energy for so many different services in our lives that we depend on, yet at the same time we tend to depend on one centralized grid to provide that service. I'm speaking generally. And so, I think to move forward sustainably and resiliently, we need to start thinking about having other pathways to serve those basic needs and services that people need. And so the project that I'm working on really is trying to get at that. What are those basic needs? How are people fulfilling them? And how can we think about placing things like microgrids in places where communities have that backup system and have choices, even in a disaster, of how to fulfill those basic needs. And so when I think long-term, what does sustainability look like? It really is people having options to fulfill the needs that they really care about and value in their lives.
We can't think about addressing the impacts of climate change without thinking about it in the context of justice. And one way to make sure that we don't lose that in all of the wonderful work we're doing and all the projects is that when we initiate things, let's have the originating documents make reference to equity and justice. The MOU that I mentioned with the non-processed water systems, that has an explicit recognition of not just reliable and resilient solutions for these communities, but equitable solutions for these communities. The Long Island Smart Growth and Resilience Partnership that I mentioned, that was established with a number of principles, including equitable redevelopment. And the launch event that I mentioned was done with a lot of the segments of that event were all about justice and how to redevelop in a just way. One of the things that grew out of that, because I think it was a focal point from the very beginning, was something called Community Viz, which is a scenario planning tool that communities can use for looking at what are the impacts on that community, how do they think about responding to those impacts. It uses GIS layers, and we incorporate into that an environmental justice layer. So communities can think about impacts from the environmental justice perspective. And another thing that grew out of that partnership was a health impact assessment. And in doing a health impact assessment, you're looking at, you're helping to plan for solutions by looking at various scenarios. And in one case, we did work out on Long Island in Suffolk County, and we looked at the effects of upgrading septic systems, which were spewing nitrogen into the environment and causing all kinds of problems. Well, one of the ways of dealing with that is requiring upgrades of those systems. Well, if you're a low-income renter and your landlord is going to be paying a lot for upgrading that system, it's going to end up being returned to you in terms of a rent increase. That's one of the things we did and looked at in the health impact assessment. What impact will this have on the people who are renting from the landlord? What will that mean for them in terms of purchasing food? So everything we do can be looked at through that lens of justice. And the last thing I'll say is, I love that Susan talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, and SDG 16 is the goal of peace, justice, and strong institutions. And I see that as an overarching goal. That's my personal view. And I think it's hard to achieve a lot of the other goals if you don't have those. And my view, from my vantage point, is that you can't have peace, justice, and strong institutions unless you build capacity for conflict resolution and collaboration. Those are key to making a successful justice and institutional system. That's what
Of course, very, very quickly. We're over our time now, but yes.
Okay, just wanted to say, listening to our other panelists, Many organizations, local and especially from the US, came to Puerto Rico after the hurricane, and actually establishing their offices there, because they believe in long-term recovery. And it seems to me that like I said, we appreciate the work that they do and the funding that they're bringing to Puerto Rico, but once they're gone, it worries me what they're leaving behind. And we can't have communities depending on those entities. We can't have communities depending on that kind of interaction. So every time I meet with different funders from the US, I tell them, listen, if you're going to stay here for a while, at least promote capacity building. You need to, when you leave, you have people that that know how to run everything, even if you're gone. So that for me is extremely important to maintain sustainability and the technical knowledge that they're bringing. And then the second really quick thing is, and as a law school professor, what is the role of the lawyer? In the case of Puerto Rico, constantly promoting community lawyering. If you go to law school and eventually you decide any path you want to take, that's okay. But present in all the law schools should be the curriculum and exposure to working with communities and not just working and leaving in community lawyering. Really be there for people as a lawyer. I go to the communities and I say that I'm a lawyer and they see me literally like a savior. So, because sometimes they feel like that. They're resolving legal issues, resolving so many different problems in their lives. So in that sense, what law students, your students, what kind of lawyer do they want to be in the future? So it's a question that we constantly need to promote on law schools and on the curriculums. They should be in every law school across the board.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for sticking it out. We look forward to chatting with you more. And once again, one more time for all. Thank you all.